England has over 3,000 recorded deserted medieval villages. 3,000. Places that had names, churches, families, markets, and streets, places that appeared in the Domesday Book nearly 1,000 years ago. And then, at some point between then and now, every single person left, or was forced out, and never came back. Some of them were drowned on purpose to build reservoirs. Some were bulldozed to improve the view from a rich man's window. Some were wiped out by the plague. And some simply disappeared without any clear explanation at all. These are 11 ghost towns in England that were erased from the map, and number 1 was demolished so a wealthy family could have a better garden. This is Dust and Stories. Subscribe now, because the map doesn't show you everything. Number 11, Derwent and Hton, Derbyshire. In the 1940s, the Derwent Valley in the Peak District was flooded to create the Lady Bower Reservoir. 2 entire villages, Derwent and Hton, were submerged. Derwent had a 17th century packhorse bridge, a church, a hall, and a school. Hton had a coaching inn that had served travelers for centuries. Before the valley was flooded, the buildings were demolished and the bodies in the churchyard were exhumed and moved. It's said that some families refused to leave until the very end, watching as the water crept closer to their front doors week by week. The church spire at Derwent was initially left standing, poking above the waterline like a finger pointing at the sky, a landmark so haunting that it became famous across Britain. Visitors would row out to it in boats and touch the stone. The authorities eventually demolished the spire in 1947 because too many people were trying to reach it and drowning. During severe droughts, the ruins of both villages reappear, stone foundations, road surfaces, and the remains of walls emerging from the mud as the water drops. Every time it happens, crowds gather at the reservoir's edge to stare at villages that have been underwater for 80 years. Number 10, Naptoft, Leicestershire. In the rolling farmland of South Leicestershire, there's a ruined church standing alone in a field with no village around it. Naptoft was a thriving medieval settlement recorded in the Domesday Book. It had a manor, a church, farms, and families who worked the surrounding land. Then, sometime in the 15th century, the landlord decided that sheep were more profitable than tenants. The villagers were evicted. The houses were demolished. The land was enclosed for grazing. Nobody recorded what happened to the families, where they went, how they survived, whether they found somewhere else to live. They simply disappear from the records. The church survived, barely, and today its crumbling walls stand surrounded by nothing but grass and the lumpy earthworks where streets and houses once stood. There's no car park, no signs, no visitors, just a broken church in a field and the outlines of a village that was erased because one man wanted more sheep. Number 9, Eckles, Norfolk. On the Norfolk coast, the village of Eckles fought the North Sea for centuries and lost. Eckles was a functioning community with farms, houses, and a church. Coastal flooding and erosion had destroyed most of it by the early 1600s. After a devastating flood in 1604, only 14 houses remained. The church tower, the sturdiest structure in the village, held on the longest, standing alone on the beach like a sentinel as the sea devoured everything around it. Photographs from the late 1800s show the tower surrounded by nothing but sand and waves, the last vertical proof that a community once existed here. By 1895, even the tower had fallen. Today, at low tide, you can sometimes see fragments of the old church foundations emerging from the sand, dark shapes in the waterline that appear for a few hours and then vanish again with the tide. The Norfolk coast erodes at up to 2 meters a year in some places, and Eckles was simply in the way. The village wasn't abandoned. It was taken piece by piece by an ocean that never stopped advancing. Number 8, Henderskelfa, Yorkshire. You've probably heard of Castle Howard, one of the grandest stately homes in England, made famous by the television adaptation of Brideshead Revisited. What most people don't know is that an entire village was demolished to build it. Henderskelf Castle was originally built during the reign of Edward III in the 14th century. A small village grew up around it. In 1683, the castle was rebuilt, only to be wrecked by fire 10 years later. When the Carlisle family decided to build Castle Howard on the site in the early 1700s, the remaining village was razed to the ground. Every house, every building, every trace of the community that had existed there for centuries was torn down so that the grand estate could have uninterrupted views across the Yorkshire landscape. The architect John Vanbrugh designed one of the most celebrated houses in English history on land that had been cleared of ordinary people to make it possible. Today, millions of tourists visit Castle Howard every year. They walk through the gardens, they admire the architecture, they photograph the fountain. Almost none of them know that an entire village was demolished beneath their feet to make room for the view they're enjoying. Number 7. Godwick, Norfolk. Deep in the Norfolk countryside, a set of grassy mounds and a single ruined church tower are all that remain of the village of Godwick. In the medieval period, Godwick was a proper settlement with houses, farmland, and a functioning community. It appeared in tax records and on early maps. Then, in the 16th century, the landowner Sir Edward Coke, one of the most powerful lawyers in English history, the man who helped establish the principle that even kings are subject to the law, decided to enclose the land for his own use. The tenants were evicted. The houses fell into ruin. The village became a park. The great legal champion of individual rights against the crown apparently saw no contradiction in throwing an entire community off their land. Today, the earthworks of the old streets are clearly visible as ridges and ditches in the grass. A single barn from the later estate still stands. But of the village itself, the houses, the people, the community, nothing is left except shapes in the ground that only make sense from the air. Number 6. Snap, Wiltshire. On the Wiltshire Downs, not far from the Marlborough Road, the ghost of a village called Snap clings to a shallow valley. Snap was a small farming community that survived for centuries in one of England's most exposed and wind-battered landscapes. By the 19th century, the population had dwindled to almost nothing. The last few families were tenant farmers working land owned by wealthy estates. When mechanized farming arrived and landlords consolidated their holdings, the remaining families were simply no longer needed. One by one, they left or were moved on. The last resident departed in the early 20th century. The village had no dramatic ending, no flood, no fire, no eviction order. It just became a place where nobody needed to be anymore. And so, everybody left. Today, the ruins of Snap's cottages are visible as low walls and rubble in the grass. No road leads to it. There's no footpath, no sign, no marker. You have to know it's there and be willing to walk across open downland to find it. Snap wasn't destroyed by a flood or a plague or a military order. It was simply made economically irrelevant, and that was enough. We're halfway through. Some of these villages were taken by the sea, some were demolished by landlords, and some just faded away until there was nothing left. Subscribe and stay. The last 5 are the ones you won't forget. Number 5. Ingersby, Leicestershire. Like Knaptoft, Ingersby was a medieval village that was wiped out by Enclosure, but the earthworks here are some of the best preserved in all of England. Ingersby was recorded in the Domesday Book and was a sizable settlement through the medieval period. In 1469, Leicester Abbey enclosed the entire village for sheep pasture. Every family was evicted, every house was pulled down. The abbot decided that wool was worth more than people, and with a stroke of a pen, a community that had existed since before the Norman conquest was erased. The site was converted into a single large sheep farm. Today, the earthworks are stunning. You can clearly see the outlines of individual house plots, the hollow ways where streets once ran, and the fish ponds that supplied the village with food. Walk along the hollow ways, and you're literally walking in the footsteps of people who were thrown out of their homes 5.5 centuries ago. It looks like a blueprint of a medieval village pressed into the grass. 550 years after the last family was evicted, Ingersby is still readable, a village-shaped scar in the landscape that the land has never fully healed from. Number 4. Hton on the Hill, Norfolk. In 2007, archaeologists made a remarkable discovery beneath a farmer's field in Norfolk. Using ground-penetrating radar, they found the remains of a complete Anglo-Saxon church buried beneath the soil, the oldest known church in England still standing to any height. The church belonged to a settlement called Hton on the Hill, which appeared in the Domesday Book but was abandoned and lost sometime in the medieval period. Nobody knows exactly why the village disappeared. No records explain it. No chronicles describe what happened. The community simply vanishes from the written record, and at some point the church was buried by centuries of plowing, each pass of the plow pushing a little more soil over the walls until the entire building was underground. When it was excavated, fragments of wall paintings dating back over 1,000 years were found inside, some of the oldest decorative artwork in any English church. A village that existed for centuries vanished from the records and was literally plowed into the ground until modern technology pulled it back out. Number 3. Bothwellhaw, Lancashire, now Strathclyde. In the post-war decades, the village of Bothwellhaw in the Scottish Borders region, but historically and culturally tied to the Lancashire coalfield communities, was demolished and flooded to create the loch at Strathclyde Country Park. The village had been built around a coal mine and was known locally as the Palace. At its peak, it had 2 churches, 2 schools, a miners' welfare club, 450 homes, and one notable absence: no pub, on the orders of the Duke who owned the land. The mine closed in 1959. Residents were dispersed to other housing across the region. The village was demolished in 1966, and the site was later flooded to create the recreational loch at Strathclyde Country Park. Today, families picnic on the grass. Children play on the shore. People sail boats and kayak across a loch that covers the exact spot where 450 families once lived their entire lives. Not a single structure remains above water. The village that had no pub now has no anything. Number 2, Wimpol, Cambridgeshire. At Wimpol Estate in Cambridgeshire, one of the National Trust's most visited properties, there's a secret hidden in the landscaped parkland. In the 18th century, the estate's owners hired the legendary landscape designer Capability Brown to redesign the grounds. Brown's vision required sweeping views, rolling lawns, and carefully positioned trees. There was just one problem: a village was in the way. The hamlet that had existed beside Wimpol Hall for centuries was demolished and its residents relocated so that Brown could create his vision of the perfect English landscape. Nobody asked the villagers what they thought. Nobody recorded their names. They were simply moved, their homes torn down, their gardens plowed under, and the land smoothed into the rolling parkland that visitors admire today. The earthworks of the destroyed village are still visible in the park, grassy bumps and ridges that trace the outlines of houses and streets that were bulldozed so a wealthy family could look out of their window at an uninterrupted view. The National Trust now interprets the site and acknowledges what happened. But for 2 centuries, the village was simply erased, physically and from memory. Number 1, the 3000. And finally, the biggest ghost town story in England isn't about a single village. It's about all of them. Between 1300 and 1500, over 3,000 settlements disappeared from the English landscape. 3,000. The reasons varied: plague, enclosure, soil exhaustion, flooding, landlord evictions, changing economics. Some were abandoned gradually as families drifted to larger towns. Others were cleared overnight when a landlord decided sheep or deer were worth more than people. Many of these villages are recorded in the Domesday Book of 1086 and in medieval tax records, names on parchment for places that no longer exist. Their earthworks are visible from the air across almost every county in England. Ridges in plowed fields, bumps in grazing land. The outlines of streets that haven't been walked on in 500 years. In Northamptonshire alone, there are 166 recorded deserted settlements. Leicestershire has dozens more. Norfolk, Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, Herefordshire. The list runs through every county in the country. In Herefordshire, so many villages were abandoned after the Black Death that surviving churches had to merge because the remaining population couldn't support more than one priest. Most of these sites have no signs, no plaques, no visitor centers. They're just there, shapes in the earth, where entire communities once lived, worked, married, had children, grew old and disappeared. 3,000 villages erased from the map. And most people in England have no idea they're walking over them every day. England doesn't just have ghost towns, it has thousands of them, drowned, demolished, plowed under, cleared for sheep, bulldozed for a better garden view. 3,000 villages that existed for centuries and then vanished, leaving nothing behind but shapes in the grass and names in a 1,000-year-old book. If this video showed you an England you didn't know existed, subscribe to Dust and Stories. We find the places the world forgot, and we bring you the dust and the stories behind them. Like the video, drop a comment telling us which village on this list hit you the hardest, and thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.